At this moment of increased uncertainty about Israel's future, as the war with Hamas rages, it is more important than ever that we fight to protect Israel's global standing and partnerships. The U.S.-Israel relationship is sacrosanct. I remain hopeful that the long arc of history will bend toward a new Middle East where the children of Abraham, Jews, Christians, and Muslims, can live in peace and prosperity. As Theodore Herzl once said, "If we will it, it is no dream." Dear friends, those are not my words. They are the words of our most honored guest this evening, a leader in Washington who has emerged as one of Israel's staunchest supporters. At a time when increasing numbers of those many of us consider our otherwise ideological allies have expressed greater ambivalence and even hostility toward the U.S.-Israel relationship, he has courageously supported Israel's right to defend itself and denounced anti-Semitism at every turn, even as he has come under vicious attack for doing so. To introduce him, I am delighted to call upon our Temple board member, Shoshana Grus. Not only a renowned fashion designer and business owner, Shoshana is also deeply invested in the welfare of this city and is particularly committed to supporting local workers. She's involved in the Society of Memorial Sloan Kettering, which she chaired, the Blue Card, and the Nightingale Bamford School, among other important city institutions. Giving back to Manhattan and providing positive role models for young women everywhere are goals toward which she strives. And she is always present when the welfare of the Jewish community is at stake. She serves on the board of Hillel International, and we know that some of the most important struggles are taking place on the college campuses. So please welcome and please thank Shoshana Grus.
Shabbat Shalom and good evening, everyone. I'm excited to introduce you to one of my greatest heroes and someone I'm honored to call my friend, Congressman Ritchie Torres. Congressman Torres is the Democratic congressman representing New York's 15th district, the district representing the South Bronx. In 2013, at the age of 25, Ritchie became New York's youngest elected official and the first openly LGBTQ person elected to office in the Bronx. He served 7 years in the city council and won election to Congress in 2020. Where he serves as Vice Chair of the House Committee on Homeland Security and on the House Committee on Financial Services. Ritchie continues to work tirelessly protecting the city's affordable housing stock and tackling the city's opioid epidemic, amongst so many other pressing issues his community is facing. Congressman Torres, it is truly a gift and an honor to have you at Temple Emanu-El. I started reading about Congressman Torres in early 2020 and became a huge fan. I was and am impressed by pretty much everything I know of him. What first caught my eye was an article where he was openly defending Israel. I hate to say this, but I was confused as to why. When I went deeper into his ethos and stance on Israel, I understood what he was doing. That he was doing this because it was the right thing to do, and that is not something that I have seen in politics, not any time recently. I'm impressed by all the issues Congressman Torres takes on. He is a fierce defender of the community he grew up in the South Bronx, a community that is too often ignored. He also put a bit of a bullseye on his back for defending the Jewish community, and for that I am personally forever grateful, most especially because he does not have to. he could just say nothing. I'm so excited for you all to meet Congressman Torres. This is a man whose efforts we must lift up and get behind. His central mission in life is to fight for the poorest and lowest income, and I truly believe that any society that is going to heal itself must start with the most in need. Not only is Ritchie doing amazing things for our most in need communities, he is going out and defending the Jewish community in particular because he honors the truth. I think it's as simple as that. So while he is speaking out against anti-Semitism, we all need to hold him up, and we need to have his back. These past few years, most especially since October 7th, there has been a horrific rise in anti-Semitism globally. And many of us feel at a loss as to how to combat it. One of the things we can do is support the courageous messengers like Congressman Torres who fight on our behalf. He's an amazing man, and to have someone of his caliber defending the Jewish community and Israel's right to exist is such a gift. Thank you, Congressman Torres.
Thank you, Shoshana, for those kind words. My mother would be very happy. And thank you, Rabbi. I was once accidentally introduced as Rabbi at a synagogue, so I consider that a promotion. But Shabbat Shalom, it's an honor to be with you. I'm Congressman Ritchie Torres. My rabbi calls me Ritchie Torah. I tell people after the expulsion of George Santos, I became the most prominent Jewish gay Latino congressman from New York. So I've made history. But I am truly honored and humbled by the opportunity to offer reflections on Black History Month and October 7th and Black-Jewish solidarity. You know, the first historian was an ancient Greek by the name of Herodotus. And in writing his historical account of the Persian Wars, he wrote that the purpose of history is to ensure that the brave deeds of brave people not be forgotten. For Herodotus, the purpose of history was not only remembrance, but reverence. It was not only instruction, but inspiration. And so I want to share with you the moral inspiration that I have drawn with Black history in mind. You know, when you think about great Black leaders in American history, the names that often come to mind are Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Frederick Douglass, Rosa Parks and Harriet Tubman, W.B. Du Bois and Booker T. Washington. But there's a lesser-known figure named Ida B. Wells, who is every bit as consequential, but whose legacy historically has been overlooked, so overlooked that the New York Times did not write an obituary until 87 years after her death. But Ida B. Wells is a role model for all of us, for she was a fearless truth teller in a world of lies. The life that she led was both tragic and heroic. She was born a slave in Mississippi. She lived through the catastrophic failure of Reconstruction. She saw firsthand how the promise of Reconstruction had been broken by Jim Crow, which was a system of violence and terror against African Americans. And she lived in a dangerous world where the lynching of African Americans was happening with greater frequency and ferocity. And she asked herself, why does no one seem to care? Why is no one speaking out? Why is no one able or willing to tell the truth? These are the same questions that we are asking ourselves in our own time in a post-October 7th world. And so Ida B. Wells chose to stand up when others stood by. She chose to speak out when others stood silent. And this Black woman, born a slave, became the greatest investigative journalist in our history. There was no one who did more to expose the barbarity of Jim Crow, to expose the epidemic of lynchings against African Americans, than Ida B. Wells, who inspired the founding of the NAACP. In 1892, she wrote a book entitled Southern Horrors, in which she wrote, "Somebody must speak the truth. Somebody must show that the Afro-American race is more sinned against than sinning, and it seems to have fallen upon me to do so." Those words remind us that there are moments in history when the burden of standing up and speaking out might fall upon you. And so in the spirit of Herodotus, we should be inspired by the brave deeds of Ida B. Wells. We should strive to be fearless truth-tellers in a world of moral confusion. In a post-October 7th world, we should strive to be an oasis of moral clarity in what increasingly feels like a desert of disinformation and delegitimation and double standards against the world's only Jewish state. The Jewish community was shaken to the core by October 7th. In the immediate aftermath, I know many Jewish friends who were waiting to hear their friends check in and ask, "How are you doing? How are you feeling? Are you okay?" And too many were waiting for calls and emails and texts that never came. Instead of love and support, there was deafening silence. Deafening silence. And so October 7th has made the Jewish community feel more lonely than ever before. The shock of discovering one's loneliness in an uncaring world can be soul-crushing. But I am here to tell you that you are not alone, that there are non-Jews who do care, who do stand up, and who do speak out. And for me, it is not a burden but a blessing to rise up in defense of my Jewish brothers and sisters. People often ask me, "Ritchie, you are a Black, Latino, gay, millennial from the Bronx who until recently had no Jewish constituency. Now I have Riverdale." But people would ask me, "Why do you care so deeply about combating anti-Semitism? Why do you speak out so forcefully and frequently, so visibly and vocally?" And I simply reply, you are asking the wrong question. The question is not, why have I chosen to speak out? The question is, why have others chosen to be silent amid the deadliest day for Jews since the Holocaust? What must be explained is not courage, but cowardice. What must be explained is not caring and compassion, but silence and indifference. One need not be Jewish to combat anti-Semitism, just like one need not be Black to combat anti-Black racism. Throughout history, there were Jewish Americans who gave their lives, who paid the ultimate price for the cause of civil rights. 60 years ago, Michael Schwerner, a Jewish American, Andrew Goodman, a Jewish American, and James Chaney, an African American, were all barbarically murdered in the Mississippi burning so that Black Americans could have the right to vote freely and live with dignity, unencumbered by the cruelty of Jim Crow. And so the lesson learned from our shared history is that we are all in this together. In the words of Dr. King, we are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied together in a garment of destiny. 10 years ago, I went to Israel for the first time. I jokingly tell people I'm an Ethiopian Jew. And an Israeli said to me, "You're not attractive enough to be Ethiopian." So I have been a victim of Israeli bluntness. But when I went to Israel, the most poignant experience was Yad Vashem. And I remember coming across a quote that I suspect all of you have seen. First, they came for the socialist, and I did not speak because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionist, and I did not speak because I was not a trade unionist. And then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak because I was not a Jew. And finally, they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. We are all in this together. Supreme Court Justice Robert Jackson, who wrote The Great Dissent in Korematsu versus the United States, served as the chief prosecutor in the Nuremberg trials. And in his opening statement, he said that the wrongs that we seek to condemn and punish are so malignant, so calculated, so devastating, that we cannot tolerate their being ignored because we cannot survive their being repeated. Those same words should be spoken about October 7th. Israel cannot tolerate October 7th being ignored because the Jewish state cannot survive it being repeated. October 7th was a crime against humanity so barbaric that it cannot be ignored. It cannot go unpunished. Hamas must be brought to justice. And Israel has a right to defend itself against Hamas in the wake of October 7th for the same reason that the United States had a right to defend itself against al-Qaeda in the wake of 9/11. Self-defense is the right and responsibility and raison d'etre of every nation state, including the Jewish nation state. Imagine speaking to an Israeli mother whose child was murdered on October 7th, which is a mother's worst nightmare. I cannot imagine anything more cruel and callous than telling that mother, you had this coming. You and your people brought this upon yourself. For me, this is not about politics. This is about decency. It is indecent to blame the victims of terrorism rather than the terrorists themselves. It is indecent to rationalize and even romanticize the terrorism of Hamas as quote-unquote resistance. It is indecent to tear down posters of the hostages and promote images of the paragliders who murdered in cold blood 260 young Israelis. And the moment we live in reminds me of the words of Dr. King, who said, history will record that the greatest tragedy is not the strident clamor of the bad people, but it's the appalling silence of the good people. Elie Wiesel said that the opposite of love is not hate, it is indifference. And what we have seen in the aftermath of October 7th is widespread silence and indifference and cowardice from so-called leaders in our society, from human rights organizations, college and university presidents, self-proclaimed progressives. This is not only about the interest of Israel and the Jewish community. This is about the values of our country and civilization. If we as a country cannot bring ourselves to condemn with moral clarity the murder of children and civilians, then we must ask ourselves, what have we become as a society? There are growing numbers of Americans who have been indoctrinated with a hatred for Israel so fanatical and visceral that it renders them indifferent to the value of Jewish life. October 7th has been an awakening for the Jewish community, but it should be a reckoning for every single American. We all have a duty to confront the deepening rot of anti-Semitism on college campuses, on social media platforms, and even in the halls of the United States Congress. And so you can count on me to be one of those voices in the fight against anti-Semitism. In 2023, I had the opportunity to meet a man by the name of Dr. Clarence Jones, who served as Dr. Martin Luther King's lawyer. Dr. Clarence Jones co-wrote the I Have a Dream speech and co-organized the March on Washington. And it turns out that Dr. Jones lived in my congressional district in Riverdale in the fateful year of 1963. Needless to say, I was not alive at the time. And not only did he live there, but he actually arranged for Dr. King to move into his home in the lead up to the march. Dr. Jones has shared with me that when he would see white participants in civil rights marches, he would ask them, "What motivated you to come here?" And the response was almost invariably the same. "I am Jewish, and my parents and grandparents were victims or survivors of the Holocaust, and I'm here to honor their memory and their legacy." And so Dr. Jones was so moved by those words that more than a half a century later, at age 94, as one of the sole surviving members of Dr. King's innermost circle, he has dedicated his life to the cause of Black Jewish solidarity, which to him is not a change but a continuation of his life's work in civil rights. We all know that Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel marched with Dr. King from Selma to Montgomery. And when he was done marching, he famously said that he was praying with his feet. And so we should celebrate Black History Month not only with remembrance, but with a revival of that great Black Jewish American tradition of praying with our feet and standing as one and rediscovering our common humanity. I, for one, will pray for that revival, not only with my words, but with my feet. God bless each and every one of you.